So, good evening to all. Respected faculty of today's virtual CP seminar, Advocate CA Chaitanya sir from Bangalore, Vice Chairman CA PJ Reggie, Secretary CA Shivaprasad, members of the profession, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we are going to witness one of the golden moments in the history of Kannur branch with the presence of an eminent and one of the leading direct tax professional in India, Advocate C.A. Chaitanya sir from Bangalore. Sir, we are really delighted and I am saluting your simplicity and commitment towards the profession. Actually, when I contacted this great professional, immediately responded and confirmed his presence as a faculty of this seminar on tax implication of section 56(2) subclause 10 of the Income Tax Act. Sir, I am thanking you for your great commitment and taking this opportunity to welcome you to this seminar of Kannur branch of SARC of ICAI. So thank you very much. I am taking this opportunity to welcome all the members of the profession and thanking for your great support to the branch and the profession. Friends, tomorrow we are going to witness another vibrant personality on direct taxation, say Dr. Girish Ahuja sir, on deeming provisions under the Income Tax Act, and the timing will be 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. On Wednesday, 8th July, we will have another CP credit on standards on auditing, an update for 2019-20 audit by CA Joman K. Jor. And on 11th also, we will have another seminar on GST. Now I request the Vice Chairman of Kannur branch, CA PJ Reggie, to formally introduce our faculty. And before that, I request all the members to fill the Google form, which is a must to have the CP credit requirement. So over to Reggie. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. Chairman of the Kannur branch, CA Jayaprakash, very respected Speaker of the webinar, Chartered Accountant and Advocate K.K. Chaitanya sir, Secretary Shivaprasad sir, my fellow members in the profession and dear friends. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce before you a great personality as the speaker of the today's webinar. He is a Chartered Accountant and Advocate K.K. Chaitanya sir. He completed his pre-university course with the 8th rank in Karnataka state. Took his degree in BCom with first rank in Mysore University. He completed CA intermediate with 47th rank All India and completed CA final with All India 15th rank and was a topper in Karnataka state. He did his articleship with PwC Bangalore and completed industrial training with Hindustan Liver Limited Bangalore. He practiced as a chartered accountant for 14 years, specializing in taxation matters. Now he is one of the leading advocates in Karnataka High Court. His lectures includes lectures at IIM Bangalore, ICAI New Delhi, ICAI Bangalore, and Direct Taxes Training Center of Income Tax Department. He presented various papers in income tax and VAT at various metros and other cities across the country. He is a member of study group of ICAI for framing guidance note on transfer pricing. He co-authored 2 books. The first one, Tax Holidays, under section 10A and 10B, published by Walters Kluwer, and the second one, Decoding section 5, published by Oakbridge, and he individually authored 1 book on special economic zone. He contributed articles for ITR, Chartered Accountant, Taxman, CTR, and other reputed journals. He deposed before Committee on Direct Tax Matters headed by Honorable Justice A.P. Shah on the 11th of March on FIIS. He was a country reporter for India for IFS Seoul Congress 2018 on withholding tax. With these few words, let me very proudly present before you the speaker of the webinar, Chartered Accountant and Advocate Sri K.K. Chaitanya sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Raji. Thank you. Over to you, Chaitanya, sir. Sir, please.
Let me at the outset thank the Kannur branch for inviting me and also showering a lot of affection. I would very fondly recall my visit to your branch a good 25 years before, and had very good fun, and also addressed the Kannur branch then. Destiny has it that I'll have to be addressing again after 25 years gap, and I wish I could have personally visited a beautiful place like Kannur, but then we don't have a choice but to see each other through the webinar. I'm glad that Kannur branch is quite active in conducting programs. It's the coming week from Mr. Jayaprakash that you have Mr. Ahuja coming and you have Mr. Jerome speaking. Excellent. In fact, this COVID-19 has come in as a boon, in as much as you could have many more seminars and you could have faculties from all across, addressing your branch rather than having to get them to your place, which would have been difficult. So I would, encourage your branch to continue with this good work. And I'm sure, because of webinars like this, the knowledge levels of the chartered accountants at the Mofussil areas will significantly scale up. And for every small thing, you don't have to look up to consultants in a bigger city. So it's a time when, people are able to handle it themselves rather than looking up to somebody else. So in that context, it's very, very important that, you would have seminars. I would encourage you to have seminars even on international taxes. Nothing is rocket science here. It's all, so for example, if I speak to you and I impress you, you would think that I'm an expert. You do not know how many mistakes have I committed. I would not exhibit those mistakes now. So in the course of learning, everyone would have made the mistakes. In the first reading, everyone will find it difficult. So there is no difference between a CA or an advocate in Kannur or a CA or an advocate in Bangalore. So it's all the same, except that the efforts will have to be made. I'm glad that some of the chartered accountants in Kannur have overseas branches. So it's high time you also start small sessions on international taxes, and it's important that the chartered accountants will be equipped with this knowledge. You don't have to worry whether people may say we will not get so many clients in Kannur for consulting or high-end work or whatever. Nothing of that sort. If you're very good, people from Bangalore will come and reach you. If you're very good, people from Delhi may come and reach you. So you do not have to look only for clientele from Kannur for upping your knowledge levels. So with this background, let me just get to my topic. You are a crowd of about 60, so it's not a very big crowd. So what will make it is an interactive kind of a session. So you do not have to wait for question answer at the end. I would ask you at every level you have any questions. Kindly ask your question then and there, and we will try to address these questions. Now, we are dealing with 56.2.10. This section is gifted to you by yourself. 56.2.10 deals with gifts, but this section is gifted to you by yourself. So what do I mean by that? People started introducing artificial gifts in the books of account to account for the cash shortages. So whenever there's a cash shortage in the books of account, they would start getting gifts, which gifts are never real. They're all imaginary gifts taken into books of account. Department started scrutinizing them and working it out under section 68. But then how many such cases can they be screened through section 68, cash credits? And even in those cases, many a times department did not find it highly successful. So then they thought, okay, we will have gift tax. When the gift tax was introduced, it was sometimes donor-based tax, sometimes the donee-based tax. And they found that, there are far too many exemptions in the Gift Tax Act, where people started routing their monies through exempt gifts fictitiously in the books of account. Well, then they thought, okay, we'll not have this gift tax. We'll rather go with one simple section under 5625, where they said, okay, any individual or a Hindu undivided family who gets a gift of cash beyond 25,000, it will be deemed to be income. So now, if you are to get a gift from any other person beyond 25, they said under 5625, it will become an income. This is slightly improvised in 5626. But later on, what people have started doing? The individual and HUF now know that if they introduce cash, they will have to pay tax. So they stopped introducing cash, but they started introducing near cash. That means instead of cash, they'll bring in some share, they'll bring in jewelry, showing them as gifts and later on selling it and converting the black money into white money. So then they realized, I don't think we should limit it to cash. We should also extend it to other properties. That is when they brought 5627, where for individual HUF, they said cash exceeding 50,000, immobile property, and movable property. In movable property, they have named a few assets. Jewelry was there. People start finding a loophole even there. They said, okay, jewelry is there, fine. I will not get jewelry, I will get bullion. So they started getting bullion. They started making fictitious entry of bullion. So I need about 10 lakh. I would say I have received from Jay Prakash bullions worth 10 lakh. And then I'll sell it and, launder my black money into white money. Then they realized this and made an improvisation. They included bullion also as part of movable property. That is when 5627 was brought in. But then 5627 was made applicable only to individual and HUF. So what people started doing? They started doing it through the firm, through the partnership form, or through closely held companies. But then they realized, okay, we'll have to have some other section. They brought in 5627A. But then it applied only to a very limited extent of receiving a share in a closely held company. So this was not made applicable to various other assets like immobile property, other movable properties, sum of money. That is when they brought in with effect from 2017, 56.210. So now you have 56.210 and you have 56.210 because of our own conduct in the past, where we tried to take advantage of loopholes in the tax laws, kept making attempts to introduce artificial funds into books of account to launder our money. So now we have 56.210. As I discussed this 56.210, you will find loopholes even in 56.210. But if you start aggressively playing with those loopholes, you take my word, you will have one more clause coming in called 56.12 to address these aspects. That is why we as taxpayers and the tax advisors have to be very circumspect when you play with these sections. we should also keep our clients sufficiently warned about the adverse consequences that would entail if any provision is abused. So what will happen is, if any provision is abused, it will come back with vengeance. They will introduce and it will trouble everyone. So only a few may abuse, but once an abuse breaking provision is introduced into the tax law, it will trouble everyone. All of us, even those honest people, also will get affected. This is a point to be taken into consideration. Now, as we move, we'll now go to 56.2.10. So look at this section. And before that, they have also brought in section 2 within brackets 24, clause 17a. Section 2 within brackets 24 will deem this gift as an income. See, essentially, if you look at 56.2.10, it deals with the gifts. Gifts are not incomes. They are not earned by you. Income is something which you have earned by you. You have put in effort. So they can't simply bring in 56.2.10 and tax. First, they had to amend to 24, section 2 within brackets 24, which defines what an income is. And they have to create a fiction that even if it is a gift, it is deemed to be income. And to this effect, they have already amended to 24 by introduction of a clause called clause 17a, wherein they have said that the sum of the property referred to in 56.2.10 is deemed to be income. Now look at 56.2.10. The section starts with these words: where any person receives in any previous year from any person or persons on or after the first day of April 2017. So who it applies? It applies to any person who receives. So earlier, as I've said, 56.2.7 applied only to individual and HUF. Now look at the language here, where any person could here be a resident, a non-resident. He could be an individual, Hindu undivided family, association of persons, a body of individuals, a partnership firm, a company, a local authority, any artificial juridical person, as is referred to in section 2 within brackets 31. Every such person is covered here. So this is the kind of reach. Now, where any person receives. So when such person receives, this section is attracted. What he has to receive, we will see little later. There are 3 types of properties, which we will see little later. So any person receives. When he should receive, the receipt will have to take place during the previous year. So it's important that the act of receipt has to take place during the previous year. From whom should you receive? From any person or persons. So that means a person has to receive from another person. There cannot be a receipt unto himself. I cannot receive it from left pocket to right pocket. Kikabai Premchand's case, Supreme Court in 24 ITR 510. A person cannot receive unto himself. So there has to be a plurality where 2 or more persons are there. One would receive and other or others would give. So where any person receives in any previous year from any person or persons on or after the first day of April 2017. So 17-18 previous year onwards, this provision would apply. Now, there are 3 types of properties in 56.2.10. There are 3 clauses rather. Clause A deals with sum of money. Clause B deals with an immovable property. Clause C deals with a property other than an immovable property. I'll repeat. 56.2.10 will deal with 3 types of properties. Clause A, a sum of money. Clause B, an immovable property. Clause C, a movable property. Now, let's look at clause A. Clause A says every time when you take a clause, you have to read it with the earlier words, where any person receives in any previous year from any person or persons on or after the first day of April 2017 are the common preamble words to be used for A, B, C. Now, where any such person receives a sum of money without consideration, the aggregate value of which exceeds 50,000 rupees, the whole of the aggregate value of such sum. So you will have to pay tax if you would receive a sum of money without consideration, where the aggregate value of which exceeds 50,000 rupees. Then you will have to pay tax. Now, a few points will have to be considered here. What do you mean by a sum of money? What does money mean? Money is a medium of exchange. So in India, money will have to be understood as the rupee or the rupee equivalent. It need not be the hard cash. It could be a check or a bank draft or a bank note, because it is also a medium of exchange. Now, interestingly, because in Kannur you have, a lot of NRIs. What if you receive $100 from somebody? Assuming for a while, you are compliant with FEMA, Foreign Exchange Management Act. You get about $100. You get about, Saudi riyals, 1,000 Saudi riyals. Is it a sum of money? Is it a medium of exchange? In India, it is not a medium of exchange. So it may not fit into being called as a sum of money. So therefore, a question that would arise is whether the foreign exchange which you would receive, is it a sum of money or not? So it's immensely possible to take a proposition that the foreign exchange which you would receive is not a sum of money, because it's not a medium of exchange. You're not permitted. You can't go to a local shop and give 1 riyal and buy goods. It's not a medium of exchange. So therefore, if you would start playing with this aggressively, and everyone will start getting the foreign exchange as gifts, then I'm sure they're going to make an amendment. Foreign exchange is called a commodity. It is not money. In the context of section 73, read with section 43.5, which will deal with speculative transaction, some tribunal benches have taken a view that the foreign exchange is also goods. Foreign exchange is also a commodity. So if it is a commodity, it cannot be a sum of money. Now, you get a sum of money without consideration. So that means it has to just come to you without consideration. It cannot come to you on the basis of consideration. It has to come to you absolutely without consideration. What do you mean by consideration here? See, the term consideration is not defined. You have the Jharkhand High Court decision in Tata Yodogawa, 335 ITR 53, where they have said that the meaning of the consideration will have to be understood in accordance with section 2 within brackets D of the Indian Contract Act. Now, if you go to 2 within brackets D of the Indian Contract Act, it defines consideration as when at the desire of a promisor, promisee or any other person does or abstains from doing, has done or abstained from doing, promises to do or abstain from doing something, such act, abstinence or promise is called consideration for the promise. So this is how the consideration is defined in section 2 within brackets D of the Indian Contract Act. It need not be adequate consideration, unlike in the case of your clubbing under 64, when you say about property is transferred by an individual to the spouse otherwise than for an adequate consideration. Those things are not used here. They have not used the word adequate consideration. There has to be some consideration, which consideration could be anything. Even a promise also is a consideration under the Indian Contract Act. And there is no question of, you get 1 lakh for a consideration, which consideration may not measure up to 1 lakh. So department cannot say, see what you gave. See, for example, let us say I have an intellectual property, I have a patent, I have the copyright in a book, which copyright may be worth about 75,000 rupees. I get 1,50,000. I get 1,50,000 from Jayaprakash, to whom I have sold this copyright. No, department cannot say it's without consideration. They cannot say, no, you received 1,50,000. Your patent is worth only 75,000 rupees. It is not their business to talk about the adequacy, because the language used is just without consideration. So even if my patent is worth 10,000 rupees, if I were to sell it for 1,50,000 rupees, then they cannot call 1.4 lakh as my capital gain. Now, patent is not a problem because it is a capital asset anyway. I would have to offer it to tax under capital gain. Take a personal effect, for example. I have a furniture here, which is not a capital asset. Under section 214, a furniture item is not a capital asset because it's a personal effect. Now, let's say I have a very good teak furniture for about 20,000 rupees cost to me. Worth is 20,000. I sell it to Mr. Jayaprakash and get 1 lakh. So department cannot invoke clause A here because I have not received the money without consideration. I have received the money for a consideration. So they cannot question the valuation here. Now, aggregate value of which exceeds 50,000 rupees. That means up to 50,000 rupees, it would not be charged to tax. After 50,000 rupees, entire amount, including the first 50,000 tax. If I get 45, no tax. If I get 55, it is not that I pay tax only on 5. I have to pay tax on whole of 55,000. That's why they say whole of the aggregate value of such sum. Now the question that would arise is, can I get an amount of 50,000 or less from 10 different persons? And can I then argue that from each person it is 50,000? See, there are two views which are permissible here. Obviously, department would want to take a view on the basis of the language, whole of the aggregate value. They would want to add, and aggregate value. They would want to add the gifts which are received from all persons during the year to see whether the aggregate will exceed 50,000. And then would say that you have to pay the tax. Another method of arguing from the assessee side is aggregate value is only when you get multiple gifts from the same person. I get from Jayaprakash 10,000, I get from Jayaprakash 20,000, I get from Jayaprakash 50,000. Together it is 80,000. So that is why they have put aggregate value from Jayaprakash. I would receive from another person. I would receive from Ragi another 20,000 rupees. So that will have to be separately aggregated with reference to Mr. Ragi himself. So this is one way of argument. But I'm sure, department would want to take a position that you will have to aggregate the gifts which are received from all the persons. If you want to contest it, you'll have to contest keeping in mind the immense litigation you will have to face in that regard. So unless the amount is large, don't get into this. Now the language is not very elegant. There's an aggregate value. Where is the question of valuation of money? Money itself is the value. So under 56.210, this is the subject matter of tax. Now, before I go to next item, immovable property, I would ask the delegates to raise any questions if they have. Feel free to ask questions. Mr. Jayaprakash, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, surely, sure.
Are there any questions? You can ask me. If there are, because, we'll have to sort out the questions then and there.
So, good evening, sir.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
My name is Srijit. I have a doubt about this. We are talking about it.
Sir, straight away go to the question.
Yes, sir. Whether the money include cryptocurrency?
So, as I've said earlier, the cryptocurrency is not a medium of exchange. In fact, it is neither banned nor allowed. So there is a serious, discussion that is happening. And my knowledge is that the Reserve Bank of India is proposing to ban it. Right now, there is only an advisory which is issued saying that don't deal in cryptocurrency. But then they are mulling up with the idea of rather legalizing the ban on cryptocurrency.
Okay.
Anyway, cryptocurrency is not a medium of exchange, and hence it would not fit into being called as money.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any more questions? Sir, feel comfortable to ask questions. Anyway, I don't worry because I don't assure you that I will answer all your questions.
Okay.
That's it. Shall we proceed?
Any
Hello.
question?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi,
Please proceed,
I have a question, sir.
Yeah, proceed.
Okay. See, if I receive rupees 1 lakh from an NRI account who is not related to me,
Yes. Yeah, tell me.
what is the who is not related to me? Will it be considered as gift?
Definitely, when you receive it from a non-resident,
Yeah, no, non-resident.
yeah, whether you receive it from a resident or non-resident, you will have to, in India, if you receive it, you are liable to pay tax.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you.
Now you have an interesting question. I will alter your question.
Okay.
Mr. Bhatt will go to Dubai and will receive 1 lakh rupees there.
There. Oh, okay.
Mr. Bhatt is a resident. Let us say his friend is, see, if you get it from a relative, anyway, it is exempt, which will come to later on. You get it from a non-relative. Let us say you have a friend in Dubai.
Yep.
You go to Dubai and your friend will give you 5 lakh of rupees. Yes, sir?
Okay.
Now, in Dubai, you receive 5 lakh. First question, is it a sum of money in Dubai?
Yeah, it is a money in
Can
Dubai.
you use Indian rupee in Dubai? It is not a sum of money in Dubai. Indian rupee you receive, 10 lakh rupees you receive in Dubai. So it is not a sum of money in Dubai.
Yeah. Yes.
Because in Dubai, it is not a medium of exchange, number one. Number two, assuming it is a sum of money, you are receiving it outside India, correct?
Yeah.
When you receive it outside India, look at Section 5 of the Income Tax Act. Section 5, subsection 1, which will deal with the case of a resident, will deal only with 3 components. Income received or deemed to be received in India, income accrues or arises or is deemed to accrue or arise out in India, income accruing or arising outside India. When you receive it, it is none of these 3. Therefore, if you receive a sum of money when you go abroad, it is exempt. It is not to be charged to tax at all.
Okay.
Because of Section 5. Section 5 does not tax you in respect of income that you received outside. Now, you may ask me a question. Will it not become an income accruing or arising outside India? See, there is a difference between accrual and receipt. Accrual means you have to get a right to receive. In the case of a gift, where do you have the right to receive? It is given to you at my will. You don't have a right to receive the gift. It's only when I give you, you will receive it. So therefore, it cannot accrue or arise. So this is the answer to your question. I slightly altered your question also.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Proceed.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I have a doubt. Since this is received by resident, so the global income is taxable. So
No, this is exactly why I'm trying to, create an excitement in your mind. See, global income is to be charged to tax is the concept, but look at Section 5 carefully. Section 5 does not use the word global income. It only says 3 items are included in the total income of a resident. Income received or deemed to be received in India. Income accruing or arising or is deemed to accrue or arise in India. Income accruing or arising outside India. Now, here is a case where there is no accrual of income. There is only a receipt outside India. It is not covered.
Okay. Okay.
Everyone, all of us will jump to saying that the global income is to be charged to tax. But you have to look at Section 5.
Okay.
And most of us don't read Section 5 after we pass our CA exam. Correct?
So that means that amount when we bring back, it is not taxable.
When you bring back, it is your own money coming back to you. You can't receive it every time, no? You have to receive it only once. The Keshav Mills case, 63 ITR 630, Supreme Court. There cannot be a receipt every time. It's only remittance. First time there is a receipt. Afterwards, it's a remittance.
Okay. Okay. Okay, sir.
Yes, sir. Proceed. Any more questions? Shall we proceed?
Yes.
Now, let's move to the next clause. This deals with receipt of an immovable property. I think some of you may have to mute because I am getting some sound. Mr. Jayaprakash? Yes.
Done, sir. Done. I have done.
Yeah. So now let's look at the next type of property which is covered under 56(2)(10). It deals with any immovable property. Now, if you get an immovable property without consideration or with consideration, but the consideration is less than the stamp duty value. Unlike in the case of receipt of a sum of money where it's just without consideration, here you have two situations: without consideration, for a consideration. Now, if you receive an immovable property without consideration and you go by the stamp duty value of the same, if the stamp duty value of that does not exceed 50,000 rupees, you don't have to pay the tax. So it is, in each case, you may get immovable property from A, stamp duty value would not exceed 50,000. You may get it from B, stamp duty value would not exceed 50,000. You may get it from C, stamp duty value will not exceed 50,000. Each case will have to be seen separately, and there is no need for aggregation because they don't say aggregate value. Unlike in the case of cash, you go back to cash, you see aggregate value. Such language is not used. So, of course, it's not very practical because nowadays any immovable properties value, stamp duty value would definitely be 50,000. I don't know about the agricultural land somewhere at, like remote corners. What will be the stamp duty value? It will be minimum 50,000, no? In somewhere in Kannur, Kerala, how is it?
Which stamp duty value? That will depend, sir.
Yeah, but would it be less than 50,000? It's possible.
It's possible, sir. Possible.
It's possible. So each case, each receipt of an immovable property will have to be tested as to whether the stamp duty value would exceed 50,000. If it were to exceed 50,000, the whole of the stamp duty value will be deemed to be an income. Whole of the stamp duty value. This is when you get it without consideration. Now let us say you get it for a consideration. However, the consideration is less than the stamp duty value. That means stamp duty value exceeds the consideration. However, the amount by which stamp duty value exceeds the consideration, that excess, it has to be more than higher of either 50,000 or 10% of consideration. This is the bandwidth which is given to you. So if it is within the bandwidth, they are not going to tax you. If it is beyond the bandwidth, they will tax the entire difference between the stamp duty value and the consideration. I'll give an example. Let us say I buy a property from Jayaprakash for 1 lakh. So what is the consideration here? 1 lakh is the consideration. Let us say stamp duty value of the same is 1,09,000 rupees. Now there is a difference, that is 9,000 rupees. But the 9,000 rupees difference is within 10% of my consideration. 1 lakh is my consideration. 10% is 10,000. So this 9,000 difference, that is between the stamp duty value and the actual consideration, is within the 10% bandwidth. And therefore, I don't have to pay tax. Take one more example. I have bought the property from him at 1 lakh. Let us say the stamp duty value of that is 1,48,000 rupees. So what is the excess? 48,000. 48,000 will exceed 10%, but it would not exceed 50,000 rupees. Then also I don't have to pay the tax. Now take one more example. I bought a property from him for 1 lakh. Stamp duty value is 1,60,000 rupees. Now what is the difference? 60,000 is the difference. That 60,000 is beyond 50,000 and beyond 10%. So that means the entire 60,000 rupees I will have to pay the tax. So this is how this is worked out. Any questions, sir? Any question on the movable property? No questions? So we have to go by the stamp duty valuation. Yes, sir.
Hello, sir.
Please tell me.
Entire 1,60,000 means more than
Mr.
50,000.
Bhatt, Mr. Bhatt, there is no power. There is no power in your house.
No power.
No power. You are I am not able to see you. You are in. You are sitting in thick darkness. Huh?
Okay. Anyway, you see, 1,60,000 is the consideration. Okay.
No. Consideration is 1 lakh. Stamp duty value is 1,60,000.
Okay, 1,60,000 is the stamp duty value, but in excess of 50,000, it is to be taxed, is it?
No. See, I gave you example. The moment the difference between the stamp duty value and the actual consideration, that is 60,000. The moment it 60,000, the moment it exceeds either 50,000 or 10% of your consideration, that is 10,000, then you will not get the benefit of the bandwidth. Entire 60,000 you have to pay the tax.
Okay.
Entire 60,000 you have to pay. You will not get up to 50,000 no tax, only balance 10,000 pay tax. No, entire 60,000 has to suffer tax.
Be taxed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Will you proceed?
I will proceed.
If a resident is getting an immovable property outside India, what about the situation?
See, as I have said earlier, any receipt outside India, according to me, is not to be charged to tax because it is not coming within Section 5.
Okay. Right.
But don't generalize this statement to every income. Okay.
Fine.
There are various other incomes which are capable of accrual as well as receipt. For that, it will come as income accruing outside. Gift is an income which cannot accrue to you. You don't have a right in gift.
Fine.
Gift is given to you at gratis. Gift is given to you without your right therein. So it cannot accrue. So my answer here should be confined only to this type of income. Tomorrow, don't quote me to say that no income which is received outside is taxable in India. Whatever I have said is applicable only to 56(2)(10).
Fine. Okay, sir.
Sir, there is a question in his chat box.
Yeah.
There is a question in his chat box.
Oh, chat. Okay.
No, somebody can read. Somebody
Sir,
can read that question.
This is from Mohan sir, P. Mohan sir. A patient undergoing kidney transplantation gets rupees 50 lakh from several donors into her bank account. Please explain the taxability in the case of the donee.
See, most unfortunately, if you see this clause A, if in fact, there was a story of one Kerala girl, correct? Her mother, had to undergo a liver transplant. If you remember, about 15 days before there was a news item.
Okay,
You don't know?
okay.
In Kerala,
It was there.
Yes, yes.
Kerala, one young girl was wanting money to have a kidney transplant the liver transplant for a mother.
Correct.
Right, sir.
She was struggling and she was able to get about ₹1 lakh, but later on she put it onto the social media and was able to get good amount of about 70 lakhs. Okay. Now, most unfortunately, if you strictly interpret 56(2)(10)(a), read with the proviso, Mr. Rajesh has to mute because it's creating noise. Yeah. Now, if you strictly interpret 56(2)(a), entire amount becomes chargeable to tax. So that is why, if you recall, ago I told you that there are two interpretations possible. One is 50,000 per donor. Then it's possible for you to have a good amount of the money not being subjected to tax. On the other hand, if they understand that it will have to be aggregated in respect of all, then only 50,000 will come. And you received 50 lakh, the whole of 50 lakh will become chargeable to tax. So instead, if this 50 lakh were to come from several persons, where in each case it would not exceed 50,000 rupees, it's immensely possible to argue, subject to litigation, that the limit will have to be understood and construed with reference to each donor and not with reference to all donors put together. So this is the stand which possibly you will have to take. Yes, sir.
One question is, okay, thank you.
Is
One
it
more
clear?
question. Sir,
Expense can be this expense can be deducted and the net
No.
can be.
No. You have to look at section 57 within bracket small Roman 3, which will permit only that expenditure which is laid out or expended wholly and exclusively for the purpose of earning the income.
Earning the income.
It is not similarly worded as 37(1). It is differently worded. So you please refer to the decision of Supreme Court in Rajendra Prasad Modi, 115 ITR 509, page number 509. They have analyzed the meaning of for the purpose of earning income under 57 clause 3. You will not be able to claim it as an expenditure.
Okay.
I would suggest a better method. Of course, again, all these methods are subject to litigation. The other method is they should not gift it to mother. Okay. In that Kerala example, which I gave you, see, the baby is asking for donation, correct?
Yeah.
And it's asking for donation to be used for liver transplant of the baby's mother. Now, what baby has to do, or what donors have to do is, each donor should tell baby, hey, I am giving you an amount, not for you, but you have to spend it for your mother and take care of her well. Okay?
Like
Then,
interest.
what interest? No interest.
No, like donation in trust cases, like.
No. Don't complicate it. Make it simple. Just each has to write a letter. Let's say I want to give 2 lakh. I will write a letter to that girl. Look, I'm giving you 2 lakhs. You have to spend it on the liver transplant of your mother, and please take care of her. The moment I do it, the girl is getting it not without consideration. She gets it. She is giving me a promise. What is the promise? That she will take care of her mother. That promise is good enough under section 2 within brackets D of the Indian Contract Act to be called as a consideration.
Consideration, yeah.
then they cannot say money is without consideration. Because in Tata Yodogawa case, in 335 ITR page 53, which I said a little ago, Jharkhand High Court has stated that the consideration has to be understood in accordance with the Indian Contract Act. Now the baby,
So that
I'm
can
giving
be
her
implied
4
also.
lakh.
That consideration meaning can be implied also, not specifying any by letter or something. It can be implied also.
No. It becomes difficult for you to prove that. See, it can be by implication. A promise can be even oral, but how will you prove? So that is why I have suggested the letter method. Get a letter.
Okay.
See, otherwise, how will you prove? See, when the income tax department would ask the question, they will ask the question after 3 years, after 4 years, during assessment. At which point in time, where are these donors? How are you going to trace them?
Okay, Zara.
Okay. Yes, sir. Any more questions? Shall we proceed?
The chat box, one more question is there.
So
Mr.
whatever there in the
Ramnath
chat
Prabhu.
box, you can read, sir.
Okay, sir. Mr. Ramnath Prabhu from Nileshwar. How this provision applicable to family property settlement?
Sir, in the case of family settlement, first of all, a family settlement, there is no question of transfer. You have several decisions, starting with Kale, Deputy Director of Consolidation, Supreme Court. KALE, Kale versus Deputy Director of Consolidation, Supreme Court has stated that in the case of family settlement, there is no transfer. There is no question of receipt. And therefore, there is no question of 56-210. Even otherwise, mostly family settlement will take place between the relatives, correct? Not between me and Jayaprakash. So between the relatives, anyway, it will be exempt, which we'll be discussing a little later. Proviso is there. We are yet to discuss the proviso.
Okay.
We move now, sir?
Yeah, one more question is there.
Yeah.
That is, in the case of that kidney patient, one supplementary question is put by say Dinesh Kumar. What about is done by a mediator of group of person on behalf of the beneficiary? I think you have already answered that question.
Same answer would apply, because the mediator is giving me a promise that he would use it for the medical treatment of the patient. That promise is a consideration under 2D of the Indian Contract Act.
Fine, sir, fine. Another question from Mr. Sadiq is that what if I win a big ticket in Dubai?
What if you will win a?
What if I win a big ticket in Dubai?
What is it, big ticket?
Big ticket means that duty-free ticket, lottery.
Lottery ticket, yeah.
No, lottery is separate. Lottery is, it's already an income in terms of section 224(9) of the Income Tax Act. It is not without consideration. It's with a consideration. Lottery is separately treated and taxed. Lottery incomes are charged to tax at the maximum marginal rate.
So it is not in India, in Dubai.
It is not an Indian lottery.
No. Whether it is Indian lottery or overseas lottery, in the case of lottery, it is not a gift. Okay, you have won a lottery. There is a right to receive. So, if you win a lottery, let's say I float a lottery scheme, and you participate and you win in the lottery. I am not giving any gift of prize money to you. You are entitled to it under law. So the moment you are entitled to it under law, it will accrue to you. So once it accrues to you, you are liable to pay tax, whether it is in India or outside India. It is not a gift. So we are dealing with gift. We are not dealing with lottery winning. You have to understand that the lottery winning is not a gift. It's a matter of right to get it.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Sir, is there any difference between donation and a gift, sir?
What?
Donation and a gift. Because in 56-210,
no difference, sir. It's all the same.
Okay.
It's all the same. There is absolutely no difference between gift and donation. Both are one and the same.
Okay. Sir, one more question is in the chat box. I think that also you answered. In the kidney patient, what about the What about
Sir,
if
I
the
will
50
request one thing. Those which are, sir, one minute. Those
sir.
questions which I've already answered, you don't have to repeat them. We'll proceed.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, one more question,
Only
sir.
new questions we will take up.
Sir, one more question. Sir, you said that according to Section 5, receipts outside India is not at all taxable. Is there any case laws to support the view?
Sir, first is law, sir. After that is case law. Most importantly, law is important. You have to see what the law is. So law is very clear. You yourself can take a look at section 5(1) A, B, C. And please understand again, don't generalize this statement. It is only in respect of gifts I am saying. That there is no accrual here. It's only receipt. Upon receipt, it will become the income. And if you receive it outside, it is not coming in section 5. Actually, if you look at 1922 Act, our parent act, Income Tax Act, there section 4 was dealing with scope of total income. It dealt with receipt outside India also. Receipt outside British India, which is not there in 1961 Act. I know it is a very shocking answer to you, but this is the analysis of law.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yes, sir. I think we'll proceed.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So shall we proceed?
Yes.
Okay.
Now we are dealing with immobile property, and now in the immobile property, as I've already explained to you, how it is charged tax when you receive the immobile property without consideration, when you receive it with consideration. So ultimately, stamp duty value will have to be compared with your consideration. Now there are some provisos to immobile property. See, sometimes what will happen is you will enter into an agreement to buy an immobile property, and you actually register the property after 2 or 3 years. For some reasons, documentation may not be okay. There may be some intermittent dispute arising, and like you may not be able to arrange for the funds, so you will take some more time to buy the property. In the meanwhile, the stamp duty value revision upwardly takes place. Upward revision of the stamp duty value takes place. Let us say 3 years before I have agreed to buy a property from Jayaprakash. The stamp duty value is say 5 lakhs. And we have entered into an agreement to buy it at 5 lakhs. Today we are registering the property for 5 lakhs only. But stamp duty value has become now 8 lakhs. Now, should I be paying tax on the differential 3 lakhs? The answer is given in first proviso. It says, where the date of agreement fixing the amount of consideration for the transfer of immovable property and date of registration are not the same, the stamp duty value on the date of agreement may be taken for the purpose of this clause. So I can continue to go by what was the stamp duty value at the time when we entered into agreement 3 years before. That is only 5 lakhs. I need not take the current stamp duty value at the time of registration if there is an agreement. But then the moment it is there, people are expert in forging a fictitious agreement. They'll make an agreement, create a present agreement with the past. So that is why they have put in another condition. The condition is that if you want the benefit of this proviso, it is necessary that the amount of consideration or a part thereof has been paid by way of an account pay check or an account pay draft or electronic clearing system or through other electronic mode as may be prescribed on or before the date of the agreement for transfer of the immobile property. So that means 3 years before, when I had entered into an agreement with Mr. Jayaprakash, I should have paid some amount, not necessarily whole amount, even 10 rupees, but not by cash. I should have paid by one of these methods, account pay check or the account pay bank draft, etc. I should have paid this amount on or before I entered into agreement 3 years before. Then on only then I will get this benefit. Otherwise, no. Is this clear? Any questions on this? Any question on this? So we'll proceed to next one. Now, sometimes it so happens that in the case of immovable property, I have told a little ago that the stamp duty value will be compared with your consideration. This is something similar to 50C. Now, when you sell a capital asset being immovable property, which is land, building, or both, and if the consideration what you receive happens to be less than the stamp duty value, then the stamp duty value shall be deemed to be a full value consideration. And you have to pay capital gains tax by taking stamp duty value as the consideration in the computation. However, under 50C subsection 2, they provide you an option where if the fair market value of the property which you have sold or transferred is less than the stamp duty value, and you make such a claim before the authority, and before the stamp duty authority, you have not challenged their finding. See, when you go for registration, he will fix the stamp duty and you accept it. You don't challenge it. But when you come to income tax department to tell the department, hey, the stamp duty is very high, and there is a burial ground next to this property, which the stamp duty authorities have not considered because there's no market for it. Fair market value is much less than that. If you make any such claim, then the assessing officer is duty bound to refer it to valuation officer, who will then fix the valuation. These provisions are there in 50C subsection 2. Same provisions are applicable to even purchase of immovable property for less than stamp duty value. Same, whatever you know under 50C2 will also be applicable here. Any questions?
So one question is in the chat box, will this section attract in the case of exchange of properties?
Sir, what will happen in the case of exchange of property? Take an example. You have cash. You buy a property which is not an exchange. Let us say you have a site in Kannur, I have a site in Bangalore. We will exchange. Then, when I exchange my Bangalore site for Kannur site, what is incoming asset to me? What is incoming asset to me?
Kannur property.
Kannur site, correct? So Kannur site's stamp duty value should be compared with the value of the outgoing property. That, see, by consideration to you is Bangalore site. I am getting Kannur site. What is the consideration which I am paying? Bangalore site. So if the Kannur site stamp duty value is more than the Bangalore site value, then I have to pay under 56(2)(10). Right. Coming to you, you are getting a Bangalore site in exchange of Kannur site, correct? So if the Bangalore site stamp duty value is more than the Kannur site stamp duty value, you will have to pay tax under 56(2)(10). And that apart, you have to also keep in mind section 50C. So this is where there is exactly a case of double taxation. 50C is via the quasi-transferor, whereas 56(2)(10) is quasi-transferee. In a given situation, in respect of very same transaction, maybe both will have to pay the tax. I will give you a simpler example of cash. Later on, you can use it for exchange. Let us say I have a site in Bangalore which is worth 2 crores. I will sell it to you for, let's say stamp duty value is 2 crores. I will sell it to you for 1,50,000, 1 crore 50 lakhs. What is the delta here? 50 lakh, correct? I pay tax on 50 lakh under 50C, and you pay tax on very same 50 lakh under 56(2)(10). So there is a classic case of double taxation. Yes, sir. Have you understood?
Yes, sir.
Any questions? Shall I proceed?
So, but 50C is related, I think that related to stock and trade. No.
No. 50C is for capital asset.
Capital, correct. Sorry. Okay.
Sir, how is it that double taxation? Because it is getting taxed in the hands of two different persons, sir.
No, two different persons, correct, but the same amount is being charged to tax. Same amount. See, I have sold you a property for 1.5 crores, which is worth 2 crores. Stamp duty value is 2 crores. So I have paid tax on 50 lakh, which are not received.
Yes, sir.
On the very same difference, you are also paying tax. So there are different types of double taxation. One is the juridical double taxation. The other one is economic double taxation. Here it is not a case of juridical double taxation because two persons are paying taxes, not the same person, but it is a case of economic double taxation. Same 50 lakh is suffering tax in two hands. So that is called economic double taxation.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
for known reasons, suppose I overvalue and purchase a property. Overvalue, say for acquisition purposes or for taking bank loan, I value a property for more than the actual market rate. What happens for the other party?
Nothing will happen.
Reverse gift will be there for the other party.
How is reverse gift? See, for example, I will take an example. You have a property worth 10 lakh. Let's take an example. You have a property worth 10 lakhs. I will buy that property for 18 lakhs, correct?
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
I get the property for 18 lakhs. Stamp duty value of the property is less than the consideration. So I don't come under 56(2)(10). You get 18 lakhs for a property worth of 12 lakhs, correct?
Yeah.
You get 18 lakhs for a property worth of 10 lakhs, 12 lakhs. But then you are getting cash, you are getting a sum of money for a consideration. The word adequate consideration is not there in 56(2)(10)(a). Look at this again. Go back to the first slide. See this slide. You are getting it for a consideration. It is not without consideration. They have not said adequate, inadequate. They have not said that for cash.
Okay.
Is it clear?
Okay. Okay.
Yes, sir. Now I think we have to move now. We'll go to the third category of properties. We have dealt with the sum of money. We have dealt with an immobile property. Now we'll deal with the property other than an immobile property. See, firstly, you should know property itself is defined. Property other than immobile property will not mean any property which will get covered here. No, which we'll see a little later. They have defined what is a property. Here, immobile property being land, building or both is immobile property. And any other property will have to be share and securities. Then you will have jewelry. Then you will have the archaeological collection, drawings, sculptures, paintings, work of art, bullion. Only these are called as properties. Other items are not called as properties, like patent, invention, model, design, secret formula, the wonderfully carved furniture. So these are all not the property at all. So when we deal with 56(2)(10) clause C, the third type of property, as I've said earlier, will not mean any and every property. The property which is listed in 56(2)(7) read with 56(2)(10). I'll take you through that a little later. Now, if we get such property without consideration, but the fair market value of the same exceeds 50,000 rupees, then whole of the fair market value will have to be charged to tax. Unlike in the case of immobile property where stamp duty value is taken, here fair market value is taken. How do you get the fair market value? Rule 11 UA, sub rule 1. Rule 11 UA, sub rule 1 will deal with the various other properties. For example, clause A deals with jewelry. Clause B deals with all artistic collections like archaeological collection, painting, sculpture, drawing, work of art, etc. Clause C deals with shares and securities. So 11 UA valuation will have to be made. This is when you don't get it for a consideration. If you buy it, but you buy it at a price which is less than the fair market value, let's say you buy Hindustan Liver share, which is worth 1,000 rupees. You buy it for 800 rupees. Then the difference will be charged to tax. The aggregate fair market value of such property minus the consideration will be charged to tax. Here also they'll give you a delta of 50,000 rupees. If the delta is within, if the difference is within the delta of 50,000, you don't have to pay tax. If the difference is beyond the delta of 50,000 on the entire amount, you will have to pay the tax. Questions? Shall we proceed, sir?
Okay, sir. Okay.
Now, I've dealt with 3 types of properties, correct? These 3 types of properties which you receive will be chargeable to tax. However, there is a proviso. This proviso says, if you receive in the circumstances specified in this proviso, there are 11 clauses in the proviso, then you don't have to pay the tax. First is when you receive it from a relative. The moment you receive it from a relative, you don't have to pay the tax. Who is the relative here? The relative is defined in section 2 within brackets 41 of the Income Tax Act, but that definition is not applicable to you. There it is a very simple definition under 241 in relation to an individual spouse, brothers and sisters, lineal ascendant, lineal descendant. Only these are the relatives under 241, very narrow definition. Whereas here, the term relative is defined very broadly. There's an explanation to 56.210, which will in turn refer to explanation below 56.2.7, where the relative is defined. Who are the relatives in relation to me? In relation to me, my spouse is my relative. My brothers and sisters are my relatives. My brothers and sisters of my spouse are my relatives. Look at this. Brothers and sisters of my spouse are also my relatives. Brother-in-law, sister-in-law. My wife's brothers and sisters, they're all my relatives. Brothers and sisters of my parents are also my relatives. My uncle, maternal uncle, maternal aunt, paternal aunt, they're all my relatives. Then my lineal ascendant and my lineal descendant. My father, my grandfather, my mother, my grandmother, my children, my grandchildren. And lineal ascendant and lineal descendant of my spouse. So my wife's father, my wife's mother, my wife's grandfather, my wife's grandmother, etc. They're all my relatives. And spouse of any of the earlier categories, they're also my relatives. So you have to be careful here. This will apply only when you understand that for the recipient, he is a relative. See, for example, when I get it from my paternal uncle, I receive it from my father's brother. He is my relative. But if my uncle will get it from me, that is brother's son, that is not covered here. So it is not necessarily two-way. Sometimes it will be one way. So you have to be extremely careful here. So I'll repeat again. When I get it from my uncle, uncle is my relative. So I get it from him, it is exempt. But if the uncle gets it from me, it is not, I am not his relative. He is my relative, but I am not his relative. So is it clear? This is all how, you understand the meaning of the term relative as is given there. Any questions?
Can that father's brother give the gift to your father, then father gives to you?
See, it's like this. There is one decision called Keshavji Morarji. Okay, 66 ITR, Supreme Court decision. In the context of clubbing, clubbing under section 64,
yes.
Where if you transfer a property without a consideration to your spouse, that income from that property will be clubbed into your hands, correct? So it so happened in Keshavji Morarji case in 66 ITR that I gave a gift to my brother's wife. My brother gave a gift to my wife. So cross gifts were made. So basically it is a case of circumventing 64. Supreme Court said, sorry, we don't permit it. It will amount to a gift to spouse. And hence, section 64 is attracted. Now, applying the same logic here, if you will route the gift through somebody else in between to circumvent the provision, then you will have difficulty. You have to be careful about it. Of course, you can do it with good intervention of time. You do it after 3 years, 4 years. But if you do it immediately, within the same year, it will raise the eyebrows of the department. And there will be inquiries and why were cross gifts made? You have done it basically to overcome this particular provision. Then they say, in substance, it is a gift which uncle has received from the nephew. And therefore, they will invoke 56(2)(10) qua the uncle. So you have to be careful about it. Yes, sir. Any question? Any question? Now, we'll go to next one. On the occasion of the marriage of the individual, any money or any property received on the occasion of the marriage of the individual. What do you mean by the occasion of the marriage of the individual? There are 2-3 questions that would arise here. Marriage of the individual. Now, they have not used the word marriage of the assessee. They said marriage of the individual. Here is a case where my daughter's marriage is taking place. Jay Prakash will come and give me the gift. 5 lakh he will give me. He will not give my daughter. He will give me 5 lakhs. Now, can I claim that this 5 lakh is received by me on the occasion of the marriage of the individual, that is my daughter? Because I have not used the word assessee there. The moment I will extend it further. I have come to attend the wedding of the daughter of Mr. Jayaprakash. Mr. Raghi will come and give me gift. Unconnected, at least here. Mr. Jayaprakash will give me gift on the occasion of my daughter's wedding. There is some connectivity here. Take one more, wild example. I come to Jayaprakash's daughter's wedding. Mr. Raghi will see me there and he will give me 10 lakh. Can I argue that I received 10 lakh from Mr. Raghi on the occasion of the marriage of Jayaprakash's daughter and hence it is exempt? See, it depends on how far you take it. How far you take it. See, there is a customary practice, at least in Karnataka, where a lot of people will give gift not only to the bride and the groom, but also to the parents. So now, the question that arises is, will we get the benefit or not? So my answer to this is, as long as it is within your family, like your daughter's wedding, you getting it is fine. But when you are remotely connected with it and you still get gift on the occasion of somebody else's family's wedding occasion, it would be too much for you to claim that it is exempt here. Secondly, what is the meaning of occasion of the marriage? Is it that at the time when Mangala Sutra is being tied, only then it has to be given? It can't be given the previous day or the next day. Could it not be given during engagement? Could it not be given, like during reception, which reception could have been possibly held after the marriage? So what is occasion here? So occasion here is not the same as event. So event is different from occasion. And it is impractical to understand that the occasion is the time at which the Mangal Sutra is being tied and only then the gifts will have to be given. So what is important is, are they received in the near vicinity of the occasion? If you receive it quite away, after 2 years, after 3 years, then it becomes difficult. But there could be some situation. Let us say there is a function which is happening in my family. My daughter is getting wedded. My brother who is in the USA cannot come now because of COVID like 19. Let's say he is not my brother. My brother giving to my daughter would be fine. Now let's say somebody else, my brother's close friend, who is also our family friend, who we consider as brother, if not blood brother. He could not come because of COVID-19. After 8 months, the flights will resume and he will fly in, and then he will give my daughter 15 lakh of rupees. Can it be called as an occasion? If it is possible to prove that he could not attend the marriage for whatever reasons, and he came and gave money, if you're able to explain the source, then it's possible for you to say that it's received on the occasion of the marriage. So occasion of the marriage should not be highly technically understood. It has to be understood contextually. Any questions, sir?
Sir, in this regard, the identity of the donor is to be proved.
Yeah, if you don't prove the identity, please understand one thing, whether it is charged or exempt under 56(2)(10), you have to prove the identity in either case. Even if it is taxable, you have to prove the identity. If you fail to prove the identity, it will not be taxed under 56(2)(10). It will be taxed under section 68. And if it is taxed under 68, you will be charged to tax under 115 BBE at the rate of 60% and surcharge of 25%. With this, taking the rate close to 80%. So source proving is a must, whether you would call it as taxable gift or exempt gift. If the source itself is doubted, assessing officer will not call it as a gift at all under 56(2)(10). He will call it as cash credit under 68 and will tax you under 68 and 115 BBE, and you end up paying tax at 80%.
Okay.
One another point which I may not have time to explain, which you have to understand. There's one more section which is looking at you, is 268 ST, 269 ST. 269 ST will not allow you to receive any cash in excess of 2 lakh, even if it is a gift, even if it is exempt under 56(2)(10, you still cannot receive in cash. So you have to be very careful here. Paying tax or claiming exemption is one thing. Suffering penalty under 269 ST is another thing. That is a separate compliance. And you have to make sure that you comply with that. So if you get a gift of 10 lakh from me, you may somehow get it exempt under 56(2)(10) proviso. But if you get it in cash, you will have to pay 100% penalty under 269 ST read with 271 DA.
But sir,
Is it clear, sir?
But section 68 speaks about what it is credited in the books of accounts. Assume that I am not having any business and I have got the money in connection with the marriage of my daughter or son, whatever may be, individual is getting. So how can we connect it to section 68?
Sir, it's a very risky argument you are doing, because when it comes to section 68, though the words used are any sum found credited in the books, there is a serious division of views on it. You have some decisions, for example, Madras High Court in Taj Mahal case, they have held that if there are no books, section 68 cannot be invoked. However, there are various other decisions also which have held whether books of account are there or not, 68 can be invoked. In any whichever way, don't take a chance of 68, because tax implication will be huge. It will be 80% tax. So you can't, be taking a risk there by saying that I don't maintain books of account, therefore 68 will not apply. It's a very, very risky proposition. Although I'm aware that there are some decisions like Taj Mahal Borwell case, Taj Borwell case, it is not Taj Mahal, Taj Borwell case. Madras High Court decision is there. But then it's very, very risky to just bank on one High Court decision. See, I'm sure you are in Kerala. Mind you, the decisions of Kerala High Court, will due respect to Kerala, are always, pro-department. largely. I don't know whether you have followed it in the last 15 years. You have to be extremely careful.
One question is in the chat box, sir.
Hmm.
A partnership firm of doctors receives machinery worth 5 lakh free from a well-wisher abroad on the eve of inauguration of the hospital. What will be the taxability?
So that machinery is not a property at all. So as I've said earlier, property is not any and every property. Property is defined. Shares and securities, jewelry, archaeological collection, painting, drawing, sculpture, work of art, bullion. Only these are the properties. Machinery is not a property. So no tax.
Okay, okay.
Yes,
Another
sir.
question is, sir, another question is, housewarming of an individual receives a home theater worth 3 lakh from a friend. Taxability of gift?
Sir. Same is home
Same,
theater
same,
a
I
property? So don't repeat the
right,
questions
right.
which are already answered.
Correct. This is another question. Okay, sir.
Okay, next is you get it under a will or by way of inheritance. So when you get it by way of will, if somebody has made a will in your favor, he may be relative, he may not be relative, but he may still have made a will and you get it after his death. Of course, will becomes operative only after the death of the maker of the will. So actually 56(2)(10) would not otherwise also come, because in order to receive, you have to have some other person. When the person has died and gone, he is no more a person. So as a measure of caution, they have said this. Under a will, if you receive, you don't have to pay tax. And if you inherit also, you don't have to pay tax. And next is in contemplation of death of the payer or donor. See, in contemplation of death, it would apply only to movable property. It will not apply to immobile property. And it's a matter of evidence later on as to whether it is in fact made in contemplation of death of the payer or donor. That would be exempt. Now, next will be whatever you receive from a local authority will be exempt. See, for example, COVID-19 or some rain, natural calamity, Kannur local authority will give compensation. That would be exempt. And if you get it from any of the funds or the institutions or the hospitals referred to in 1023C, if you get it from them, it is exempt. Now look at it very carefully, the last item in the box here, in the slide. From or by any trust or institution registered under 12A or 12AA, or now after this Finance Act of 2020, 12AB has come. Now, you look at earlier clauses where the word used is from. Look at this clause, word used is from or by. So what does it mean? One aspect is very simple here. If there is a charitable trust which is registered under 12A or 12AA or 12AB, and you get it from that charitable trust, exempt, completely exempt. See, and one another way, somebody asked a question about the kidney transplant and 50 lakh or whatever. You may consider this also, where all the people who would want to donate may donate to a charitable trust whose objective is to help a person on medical treatment, and let the charitable trust give it to that person. Then also it will be exempt, because the charitable trust would be registered under 12A or 12AA or 12AB. This aspect is fine. But then they have also said one more thing, interestingly, which you have to carefully watch my words. Even the receipt by a trust is covered and exempt. Receipt by a trust is also exempt. Now, a receipt by a trust is not to be charged to tax. It won't be treated as an income. That means voluntary donations which a trust will receive will also be covered with an exemption, whether or not they actually comply with application of income or accumulation. See, for example, if you look at section 12 of the Income Tax Act, any voluntary contribution shall also be deemed to be income arising from property held under trust. Then go to section 11. Income from property held under trust will be exempt if it is applied for the purpose of charity. At least, you can make accumulation of 15% unconditional, and you have to apply 85%. Even that 85% you can accumulate by filing notice in Form 10 for a period not exceeding 5 years for specified purposes. All these conditions are there. Now, interestingly, you may now argue that, hey, under the proviso to 56(2)(10), if I am a charitable trust registered under 12A, if I receive as a trust from any other person, it is exempt here. So I don't have to bother about section 11 compliance at all. It's a very dangerous, amendment which they have carried out without knowing the implications involved here. Any questions? No questions?
I think so, sir. Okay.
Shall we proceed?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you receive it, and if there are some institutions referred to in 1023C, clause 4, 5, 6, and 6A, these are essentially the educational institution or universities or hospitals who are approved, then exempt. Now, next clause is important. By way of transaction not regarded as transfer, under section 47, look at these clauses. Clause 1, that is partition of HUF. 4 and 5, holding subsidiary. 6 is amalgamation. 6A, foreign amalgamation. Demerger, foreign demerger, amalgamation of banking company. These are all covered under 47, where these transactions are not regarded as transfer for capital gains purposes. Some of them are captured here and they are considered as exempt under 56(2)(10). Next clause is important. From an individual by a trust created or established solely for the benefit of relative of the individual. So this would apply to a private trust. Earlier we have discussed the charitable trust. Now look at a private trust. If there is a private trust, this private trust is receiving certain amount or certain property from an individual. And this trust is established by that individual for his relatives who are the beneficiaries. Then it will be exempt. According to me, this clause is irrelevant because in the case of a private trust, the moment, say, let's say I make a trust for my daughters, I will appoint Jayaprakash as the trustee. So under the law, Indian Trust Act, I have to transfer the property to Jayaprakash. He will become the legal owner. But he has an obligation to manage the property for the benefit of my daughters. So therefore, when I transfer the property to Mr. Jayaprakash under a trust, he cannot be said to be receiving it without a consideration. He is making me a promise that he will manage the property and apply it for the benefit of my daughters, which will mean there is a consideration in terms of 2D of the Indian Contract Act. So it cannot be said that he has received without consideration. Tomorrow when my daughters get it from, as a matter of right, they get it. It is not a gift. As a matter of right, they get it. So it cannot be called as without consideration. Therefore, according to me, the private trust arrangement is still not covered by 56(2)(10). This exemption is meaningless as it is not covered. And lastly, from such class of persons and subject to such conditions as may be prescribed. They are prescribed Rule 11 UAC. Rule 11 UAC is prescribed and it is amended just about, 12 days before. 20th June, there was an amendment. We issued a notification amending it. Anyway, in your context, it is not really applicable. Yes, sir. These are the exemptions. Any questions you have so far? Yes, sir. No questions?
Okay, sir. We will proceed.
Mr. Jayaprakash, any questions?
Nothing is here, sir. Chat box, no question is here.
Nothing. Right. So now, with this background, so we will look at the property. As I said earlier, the 56(2)10 is not applicable to all properties. It will apply to only the property as is defined. So what is the definition of property? Property means the following capital asset of the assessee. It means if you are an assessee receiving the property, you should receive it as a capital asset. Then only you are liable to pay tax. If you receive it as stock in trade, you don't have to pay tax. So it will apply only to gift of the capital assets. It will not apply to gift of the stock in trade. This is extremely important. Now, what is the property here? Immovable property being land, building, or both. Land is a property, building is a property, land and building is a property. But the meaning of immovable property, if you look at, for example, General Clauses Act, it defines immovable property as land and anything which is attached to land and anything which is permanently fastened to that which is attached to land and all interests. So here, that definition is not relevant here. Here they have given a very narrow definition, land or building or both. That means your lease rights, your right of way, easement rights, licenses, and all other tenancy rights. Those rights, if you receive, they may be movable property, but they are not land, building, or both. And therefore, this section is not attractive. So this is one room for tax planning, where rather than getting land, you get it under 99 years lease, get it as a lease. So it would not get covered because you don't get land, you get only the leasehold rights and land. You can avoid payment of tax. Then you have building here. Building is building which is completed. Building under construction is not a building. Supreme Court in Giridhar Yadalam's case has held a building under construction is not a building. So therefore, under construction building, if you transfer, you don't have to, the recipient would not have to pay the tax on the building portion. Of course, on the land portion, you may have to pay the tax. Shares and securities. So security here is defined in terms of section 2H of the Security Contract Regulation Act. So all those securities also will be treated as property here. But if you have associated rights in shares, it will not become a share. For example, you have tag-along rights, drag-along rights. You have supervening majority rights associated with the shares. You will have a situation of right in share. A right in share is not a share, not a security. So therefore, they may not be covered. Jewelry is defined under 214. So it will be ornaments made of gold, silver, platinum, or an alloy consisting of one or more of precious metals, all that. So it will be covered. Archaeological collection, drawings, paintings, sculptures, work of art, bullion. Is a gold coin a bullion? Bullion means uncoined mass is called bullion. That's the dictionary meaning of bullion. A gold coin is not an uncoined mass. It is a coined mass. So it may not fit into being called as a bullion. So if you get a gold coin, now it appears that it is not a property, but you be ready, the department will definitely moot an amendment to bring all this later on if you aggressively use this. So any question on this property?
Sir, you meant that property means capital asset. You have
Yes.
you have mentioned that stock in trade, this particular provision is not applicable.
Not only stock in trade. For example, you get agricultural land, you know.
Yeah.
Let us say you give me a gift of agricultural land. See, agricultural land is not a capital asset unless it is an urban agricultural land. Okay. If you go to section 214, agricultural land, if it is situated in a non-urban area, is not a capital asset.
Fine.
So section 56(2)(10) is not attracted.
So if I'm converting my capital asset into a stock in trade and after gifting the same, what will be the situation?
No, you have to understand it qua the receiver, not qua the giver.
Okay.
See, this tax under 56(2)(10) is on the receiver.
Fine.
So whether the receiver is holding it as capital asset or stock in trade, that is the question. Not from the point of view of giver.
Fine.
Any more questions? Now, relative, I've already explained who the relative is. I've already given you illustrations. And of course, in the case of Hindu undivided family, if HUF is assessee, any member of the HUF is the relative of HUF. Anyway, in Kerala, I don't think of HUF concept, right? The disbanded HUF in Kerala. Yes, sir. So, I have discussed, the most of the aspects of 56(2)(10). One more point which you have to note down is there is no double taxation here in one manner. That is, let us say I buy a property from Jayaprakash for 8 lakhs. Stamp duty value is 20 lakhs. Correct. I pay tax on 12 lakhs under 56(2)(10). Tomorrow when I sell it to somebody else, then 8 lakhs will not be treated as my cost. The 20 lakhs, which is the stamp duty value at the time when I bought the property from Jayaprakash, would be treated as my cost. So I get the benefit of stepped up cost.
Okay.
Stepped up cost benefit. So now you have, see, lot of, you can ask me a lot of questions, whatever questions occur to you. So there is an amendment to section 918 by Finance Act of 2019, which is dealing with the situation where any income arising outside India, being any sum of money paid by a resident in India to a non-resident. So that is now brought to be taxed by amending section 9(1) by inserting clause 8 there. So this is a new section introduced by Finance No. 2 Act of 2019. So there are a lot of issues relating to gifts to residents, non-residents, which I have very briefly discussed. When it comes to allotment of shares or bonus shares, one interesting questions would arise, because share is a property. See, sometimes, the revenue will argue that, hey, the company has allotted shares to you, and therefore the fair market value of the share is more than the consideration of paid for allotment of shares. So differential, you have to pay tax. But then there is an interesting decision of Supreme Court in Kodak Distillery case, 307 IT or 312, where the Supreme Court stated that an allotment is not a transfer. When a company will issue me share, in my hand it is created. I don't receive share. Share is created in my hand. So it will not amount to transfer or receipt of share, and therefore you may not have to pay tax under 56(2)(10). Sir, I think I have covered most of the aspects, and any more thing would depend on the questions you have. If you don't have questions, we can wind up.
Sir, in Kerala, we can see so many diverse cases. This alimony paid is not liable tax, but suppose voluntarily thereafter the person is paying for maintenance or huge amounts are transfer to ex-wife, what happens?
See, first of all, is it practical that, after the divorce and beyond the alimony, the husband will still give money to the spouse?
Yeah, it's happening. It's happening in Kerala.
So,
I've got
if
two,
it is
three cases.
Yeah. If it is happening because she would cease to be his spouse,
yeah,
and there is no consideration, it will be like getting it from a stranger only. So the best thing what she should do is she should get it for children. See, though the divorce has taken place, children will continue to be her children.
Correct.
So give it to the children.
Correct.
And let the children, maintain the mother.
Okay. Similarly, stepbrothers are relatives, isn't it? Stepbrothers.
No, you see section 215B of the Income Tax Act. Child is defined to include an adopted child and a stepchild.
Stepbrother, mother's another husband's son. Stepbrother.
A stepbrother. Huh?
Yeah.
See, if you would look at the definition of the relatives, see, if you go to that, it says lineal ascendant and lineal descendant of the parents of the individual. See, for example, lineal descendant of the mother.
Correct. Correct.
Need not be lineal descendant of the father also, correct?
There is an issue.
So
that is the issue. Yeah.
No, that is covered. That is covered. Lineal descendant of the parents of the lineal descendant of the individual, lineal descendant of the spouse of the individual is covered.
Correct.
Lineal descendant of the individual is covered. Now yours is a case where you have a stepbrother, right?
Yeah.
So stepbrother, if you see the meaning of relative, it says lineal descendant of the individual.
Yeah, covered. Sure. Thank you.
Lineal descendant of the spouse of the individual. So stepbrother may not be covered. Stepson may be covered.
Any spouse or
stepbrother may not be covered.
Is it?
Stepson may be covered.
Lineal descendant of mother is covered.
No. Lineal descendant is of the individual. Lineal descendant of the individual. Individual means whoever who is receiving. So the stepbrother is not covered.
Okay.
Stepson is covered.
First cousin and stepbrothers are excluded. Stepbrother.
Yes.
Yeah, first cousin sisters or first cousin brothers, correct, as well as stepbrothers are excluded. Thank you.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So one
So a
question
lot of
is
issues, but I do not want to complicate. I will want to answer only the questions because I have given you the broad framework of this section. And if you get deeper, you can make clinical analysis of every word and every letter there, but it doesn't make sense.
Sir, one question is there in the chat. I don't know whether it is already clarified, but I will read it, sir. If I gave a cash gift to my brother-in-law thereafter gifted to my wife invested the cash gift to her business. Would it attract the clubbing provision to me for the profit earned by wife from the business?
Keshavji Morarji, 66 ITR. I have already told you this. It will get attracted. Avoidable. Not advisable.
Any questions? Okay. I think almost all the doubts have clarified. Anyway,
so I would thank Kannur branch for giving this opportunity to interact with you. So I would thank all the delegates for being present and asking questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for enlightening all our members regarding section 56 to 10. And normally on the plain reading of this provision, we may feel that nothing is there and it is very simple. But during this last 1.5 hours, you have traveled through different issues and that has given a lot of thoughts in the mind of each participants. So I'm thanking for your support to the branch, support to the profession, support to all my participants. Sir, we are really delighted by your presence, and I thank COVID also, because otherwise I feel that this type of opportunity may be blocked. Anyway, thank you. For formal vote of thanks, I request the immediate past chairman Saju and my MC member Saju to propose the vote of thanks. Saju, please.
Yeah. Chairman of Kannur Branch, CA Jay Prakash, distinguished speaker of today's webinar, CA Advocate Chaitanya Sir, members of the MC, members and dear friends. I deem it an honor and a privilege to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of Kannur Branch. At the outset, may I take this opportunity to thank our distinguished speaker of the webinar, CA Advocate KK Chaitanya Sir, for his excellent presentation on the provisions of 56(2)(10) of the Income Tax Act. He has done a comprehensive analysis of the section, and I'm sure all the members would have enriched themselves by this wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, sir, on behalf of Kannur Branch. I would also like to thank all the members for their active participation and in making this webinar a grand success. Thank you, one and all. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
We will
Thank
meet in Kannur, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.